That is correct. Yeah. So yeah, I'm very glad that the random order worked out in my benefit in this case, because yeah, what I'm going to talk about is very relevant to what Rob just talked about, because both of us were talking about job applications in the games industry. So yeah, and Kelsey, as far as I know, Kelsey and I were not related, but who knows? It's a small world, I suppose. But anyway, yeah. So I provided a link to my presentation in the Philly IGDA Discord, and then I also put it here in the chat. If the link doesn't work, please let me know. But let's see. Please bear with me while I share my screen. Whoops, don't want to share that. 1 second. Oh, buttons are complicated. Okay, share. All right, so let's see. Let me bring the chat up. So if you do not see my screen, you should see games industry jobs. Where can you apply? Somebody please let me know. But otherwise, I'm just going to keep on going.
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, great. Thank you. So let's see. So I'm going to talk about, yeah, well, there it is. Games industry jobs. Where can you apply? Before I continue, so I'm RJ Reyes. Hi, everybody. There's my Discord info, and there's my LinkedIn. So whoever wants to talk to me, whoever wants to ask me questions, I always love talking about game dev stuff. Feel free to message me in Discord. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd like to think I'm a friendly person, but well, you can find out. So this very brief talk, is going to focus primarily on the different types of game jobs, or excuse me, the different types of game companies that you can apply to. Now, a little bit about me. I've been in the games industry since 2004. So in roughly 20 years of experience, I worked for a bunch of different types of companies. Primarily, I've been a game producer, but I have some experience as a business developer, and my very first job was in QA. So the different types of game companies that I'm going to talk about, I've worked at pretty much these different categories, I guess. So in this talk, I'm going to very briefly go over the difference between studios and publishers. By the way, some of this, for a lot of you, I'm guessing is going to be really obvious, so forgive me. This is really basic stuff. But then again, I'm hoping that some of this might actually be, hopefully, informative, useful. Maybe it's news to you, but we'll find out. But anyway, so I'll talk about the difference between a studio, a dev studio, and a publisher. I'll talk briefly about, okay, what's an indie? What's an indie studio? What's a AAA? What makes a AA or in-between project? And then toward the end, I'm going to talk about outsourcing companies. In my opinion, I think outsourcing companies are actually a little bit of a secret when it comes to, hey, what kind of game companies can I apply to? Because although, especially in AAA, a lot of games, a lot of AAA games primarily use a lot of outsourcing or a lot of work from outsourcing companies. But when I talk to students, when I talk to people who are just starting their game dev career, I find that not a lot of people think, or maybe not really aware of, outsourcing companies. So I'll talk a little bit about that toward the end. So let's get right into it. Okay, let's see. So the difference between studios and publishers, again, forgive me if this is really, really basic, obvious stuff, but a dev studio, obviously, a dev studio is where the actual dev work is going to be made. The dev work is going to be done, I should say. So if you want to be a designer, if you want to be an artist, if you want to be a programmer or an engineer, if you want to be an audio engineer, producer, QA, any kind of dev that you want to be, you probably want to look for jobs at a dev studio. Now, publishers, on the other hand, they provide dev support, but generally speaking, folks working in a publisher are not going to do like direct dev work. So what do publishers provide? Finance support, marketing, production, publisher side production, a whole lot of QA, legal, customer support, localization, and many other forms of support. So if you want to work in any of the fields that I just blazed through a second ago, then apply, look for work at a publisher. But again, if you want to do direct dev work, game design, programming, so on and so forth, look for studio work. Okay, so I'm going to go over my personal rule of thumbs, and maybe you're going to disagree with me, but these are just my opinions on what makes an indie company or an indie project, what makes a AAA company, what makes a AA. So for indie companies, of course, small scope, very small scope projects. My rule of thumb: if your staff, if your team comprises fewer than 20 people, and if your budget is less than 1 million, you're most likely an indie project, an indie team. Chances are that staff number, that team number, and that budget way less. So you can be a solo dev, and you can have a tiny budget. Obviously, you're an indie solo dev, right? There are countless indie devs out there here in the Philadelphia area, and not only in Philadelphia, but pretty much Pennsylvania, New Jersey, even New York City. Yeah, there are countless indie studios, but pretty much no AAA as far as I'm aware. Even New York City, if you can believe it. I sure was surprised when I moved back here, but yeah, so many indie companies that you can apply to, not just in this area, but pretty much all around the world. Now, when it comes to what kind of work can you expect to do if you work for an indie, expect to do a variety of different types of dev work. In other words, if you're an artist, maybe you'll do a little bit of concept art, maybe you'll do a little bit of 2D art, maybe a little bit of 3D art, texturing, maybe a little bit of animation. So if you're a programmer, maybe you're going to do a little bit of AI programming. Maybe you're like doing some tool programming. If you're working in a team of 4 and you're the only programmer, expect to do all the programming on the project, of course. If you're working in a team of like 6 or 7 and you're one of, say, 2 artists, you and the other artists are probably going to be doing, you're doing all the art between the 2 of you. As a producer, when I've worked for indie companies, not only have I done like the producer work, I've done some HR work. I've done, I've spearheaded the interview process. I've done some biz dev work. I've done a little bit of accounting. I've answered the phones. So again, if you're working for an indie company, especially the tiniest of indie companies, expect to do a variety of different types of jobs, maybe even jobs that aren't specifically dev related. Like I said, hopefully you won't be answering phones, but like some HR or biz dev stuff. AAA, the exact opposite end of the spectrum. Gigantic, huge scope, high fidelity graphics, right? So my personal rule of thumb for what defines a AAA company or a AAA project, if the team is over 100 people, 100 devs, and if the budget is over 50 million, it's more likely not that's a AAA project. Chances are that staff number and that budget are going to be gigantic, way more than 100, way more than 50 million. Like I think like lately a lot of the more recent AAA projects have like budgets. I'm not even talking about marketing, but just the production budget, 250 million. And when you count every dev that worked on a project, a single AAA game, maybe close to 1,000 or at least over 500. So the staff and the budget numbers for AAA gigantic. Now, if you wind up working at a AAA company, you can expect to do specialized work. So it's the exact opposite as indie dev work. So if you're an artist, you're probably one of hundreds upon hundreds of artists. You're not doing a wide variety of different types of art. You're only doing texture. You're only doing concept art, which is awesome. All that stuff's awesome, but there's just no variety. You're specialized. You're only doing 3D art, or you're only doing character animations. If you're a designer, you're only a UI UX designer. You're only doing level design. You're specifically doing the number crunchy kind of design. What do they call it? Systems designers. As a programmer, if you're a programmer, maybe you're only going to be doing network programming. Maybe you're only going to be doing AI programming. Maybe you're only going to be a tools programmer, so on and so forth. As a producer, when I've worked at AAA companies, most recently, I was specifically an art producer. So although I talked with the designers, I talked with the programmers here and there, I've for the most part, my day to day was stalking and organizing and supporting the artists only. So again, if you work for a AAA company, expect the work that you do to be very, very specialized, not a variety, not broad as if you work for an indie. And then very briefly, I'll talk about the AA or the in-between. There aren't a lot of AA companies as far as I'm aware, because obviously like I said, there are countless indies. Of course, we all know there are a bunch of AAA, but AA doesn't really, it's probably the smallest segment. My personal rule of thumb for a AA, if your team is between 20 and 100 devs, and if the budget is between 1 million and 50 million, that's a huge range, right? But yeah, so if you fall within that huge range, chances are you're an in-betweener. You're working on an in-between project or a AA project. As to what kind of work you can expect, it really depends on the double A. Before I get into that, one last thing I'll say about double A games or double A projects, they tend to be smaller in scope. Like maybe they're linear, maybe they're not, probably not open world games. They're probably relatively short to play, but they probably have AAA level graphics. Like for example, in this image or in this slide at the bottom right, I included the logo for Ninja Theory. So many years ago, they made what was it? Senua's Sacrifice, Hellblade, and Hellblade, linear game. It wasn't not from what I understand. You can beat Hellblade in maybe within 10 hours, 8 or 10 hours. But they had motion capture, like high fidelity graphics. The main character looked like the actress who provided the mocap as well as the voice. So high fidelity graphics, AAA level graphics, but small scope as far as gameplay. Now, as far as the kind of work you can expect to do at AAA, it really depends. There are some, the kind of work you can do at a AA. There are some AA studios, I'm sure, that are structured like an indie. So, like for example, going back to Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, I believe that entire team was under 40 people, I think. It's been a long time since I read the article explaining talking about their team. But as you can imagine, if it's a team of 40 working on a AA project, chances are the certain members of the team had to like double up or do multiple types of jobs. So there are some AA teams that are probably structured more like an indie, so you can expect to do a variety of different types of jobs, different type of art, different type of programming, different type of design, so on and so forth. Maybe there are AA's that are a little bit bigger and more structured like a AAA, meaning you're hired to be specifically a 3D artist. You're hired specifically to be a voice actor. You're hired, well, that's pretty obvious. You're hired specifically to be a network engineer, so on and so forth. Okay, so now I'm going to go into what I think is like the secret sauce when it comes to how to find work in the games industry. The category that I don't think is talked about that much. So that's why I'm talking about it, outsource companies or outsource vendors. So an outsource company or an outsource vendor, they're game studios, they're dev studios, but they're dev studios that work on other game companies' projects. So think of outsource companies or outsource vendors. They're the service providers, and think of the game companies they work for as clients. Generally, more often than not, outsource companies do not work on their own original game, their own original IP. They work on the client's IP. Outsource companies the kind of dev support, the kind of service that they can provide runs the gamut. Like pretty much any type of game development that you can think of, there's an outsource company that provides that type of dev support. Art, programming and engineering, localization, QA, production, customer support. So again, whatever you can think of, there's probably an outsource company out there that provides that kind of dev support. I can guarantee that, especially those of you who play AAA games, I can guarantee that almost any AAA game that you can name, recently anyway, almost any AAA game that you've played recently, if you look at the credits, you'll probably see a long list of outsource companies that have contributed to the development of that game. Especially art outsourcing. I'm guessing that's the biggest type of outsourcing, because you're making these gigantic games with gorgeous high fidelity graphics. You need thousands upon thousands of art assets. Your internal core team of like 100 something people aren't going to be able to churn out thousands upon thousands of assets. So they hire a ton of art outsourcing, which is hard to say, art outsourcing support. Last thing I'll say about art outsourcing. My goodness, that's hard. It's used extensively in AAA, to a lesser extent in indies. So like, for example, in indies, you probably don't need to, as an indie team, you probably don't need to outsource art support, because your indie project probably doesn't need that much art assets. But probably you may need help with localization. You might need a little bit help with QA or something. So that's how indie teams go to outsourcing. They look for outsourcers who can provide support in an area where that indie team lacks, if that makes sense. Okay, so I won't go through this whole list, but here are some examples of art outsourcing companies. Two of the biggest that I'm aware of: Virtuous Games, and there's a link if you're curious. So Virtuous Games is, as far as I'm aware, the biggest or one of the biggest art outsourcing studios in the world. They have multiple satellite offices all over the world, and they tend to gobble up other outsourced studios and then make, like the Blob. Or the Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing. Virtuous purchases a bunch of art outsource studios and then assimilates them and makes them into virtuous art studios. Keyword Studios is a full service outsourcing company. So whatever a game company might need, Keyword Studios provides that kind of dev support, like programming, production, engineering, art, localization, QA, so on and so forth. Blur Studios, chances are, if you watch a cinematic, you've seen a cinematic made by Blur Studios. And then the last thing in this slide, I just went to on Moby Games. I looked at the credits for Fortnite, and I just what was it? I did a search for partners. So they have a section for outsource partners or dev partners. I don't remember what it's called. And there's a big block of text. It's dozens of outsourcing companies that contributed to the development of Fortnite. So obviously it wasn't just Epic staff members, Epic devs that made Fortnite. It was Epic and then all these other partner studios, all these other outsourced companies that helped them make that game. Okay, so how can you, and this is a really complicated subject, but hopefully this can help you start in the complicated subject of where do you search for game jobs? So I linked some resources here, and let me get out of what is that called, slideshow view. So this first one, Amir Satfat's game job list. So I just switched tabs. If you should now on your screen, you should see a spreadsheet. If you don't see the spreadsheet, please let me know. But anyway, this is Amir Satvat's. It's a gigantic list of current game job openings, or game job listings from over 700 companies. I think, what does he say here? Over 745 different companies. So it's a kind of an ugly, or maybe ugly is the wrong word, but it's kind of a confusing spreadsheet, or maybe overwhelming, because it's gigantic. So just to make it less overwhelming, all you have to do is just look at the tabs here on the bottom, starting with the Start Here tab right here. When you go to the Start Here tab, you'll see here are the different types of game jobs. Art. So what's this? Art, tech, art, animation, audio, biz dev. Where's programming, engineering, and programming? So if you're a programmer, you're looking for programming engineering jobs, there are over 4,000 jobs listed in that tab. And then you click on that tab. So this is specifically the engineering programming tab. Here's this gigantic list of game companies, and then the links to their job sites right here. And then this column here shows there are 5 openings at Belka Games. There are 4 openings at Jaeger. There are 25 openings for engineers at Playrix, so on and so forth. One other thing that I find useful about this spreadsheet is for each category, it lists everything by work flexible, meaning these companies, the companies listed under work flexible, are open to remote work, or at least hybrid. Then there's some remote work, and then at the very bottom, my least favorite, all roles are work and flexible, meaning they do not want any remote workers. Everybody has to actually go to the studio. So for example, 2K, they only want in-person, in-office workers, and there are 47 openings at the 2K job board. So anyway, that's a gigantic spreadsheet that can maybe help you look for a game job. Real quick, I think during the Q&A of Rob's presentation, somebody asked about how can you get feedback on resumes. Here's another resource, the workwithindies.com, and that's this. Really useful website. Obviously, it's a website specifically defined indie jobs, but what I really like about this is scroll all the way down, and then you'll see the link to their Discord server. Their Discord server is, in my opinion, it's fantastic. It's a really active Discord community, and they specifically help game devs with job applications. So if you click on that, if you take a look at if you go to the Work with Indies Discord server, you'll see that there's a channel for resume advice. there's a channel for portfolio advice. There's a channel for just general career advice. Like I said, super active Discord community, and they help anybody with specifically game devs, of course, with just general job application, resume, portfolio, interviewing advice. I've gotten resume advice from Work with Indies, their Discord server. And then I included remotegamejobs.com. That's another Discord server. Not as good as Work with Indies, in my opinion, but still, it's free. And, they're active, they're helpful. And then Game Dev Map. And that's it. So thank you for listening. There's my contact info. And yeah, if anybody has any questions, please let me know. And I will stop sharing.
Awesome. Thank you so much, RJ. Again, yeah, I agree with I agree with Kelsey. Very, very informative. Love this, especially because again, so many things that you can start targeting within the specific areas. I also agree. Outsourcing is one of those areas I don't think people think of that much. And I don't know. I guess if I had a question for you, thinking about this, is that, I think when we think of outsourcing, most people think of overseas, but that's not really the case. And I'm curious, what do you think the balance is between the overseas outsourcing versus local outsourcing and finding a location close to you?
As far as I'm aware, I'd say that the lion's share of it's so difficult to say. The lion's share of outsourcing is overseas, but there definitely are US based outsourcers. And for example, Keyword Studio is one of the biggest full service outsource companies. I'm pretty sure they've got offices in the US. And then, coincidentally, I'm starting to next week. I'm going to start as an art producer for an art outsourcing company located in Canada. And so there in North America, there are a number of outsourcing companies, but I'd say that a vast majority, I'm just arbitrarily pulling a number out of the air. Let's say 80%. Maybe that's too high. Let's say 70%. 70% of outsourcers are probably outside of North America. But there are a good number that are in North America.